You've gone into a shop and you're walking around and you're either after a new jacket or a new tent. And every time you read a label, you can see things like hydrostatic head of 2000, hydrostatic head 10,000, hydrostatic head 30,000. But every time that number goes up, so does the price tag. What does it mean? Do you need it? Join me, BIVVIES UK, and I'll explain a little bit more about hydrostatic head and what it means to you as an individual when you go outside and face the elements. Welcome. So let's start right at the very beginning of hydrostatic head. The word itself, hydro, is water, and head basically is at the point that the material meets the water. So the hydrostatic head of the material is the water pressure at the point of the material. The better quality the material, the more pressure or weight of water required before it starts to seep through that material. And I'm going to explain that to you with a simple diagram. Now this diagram is found all over the web. You can find it everywhere. But if I use someone else's, then I could get done for copyright. So I've drawn my own. And it's a very simple diagram. And you can see there, right from the very start, a tube with the cloth and the water penetrating. And what I'm going to do is focus in on it a little bit more and explain it in a bit more detail. So here we go. This is your piece of cloth and this is a water column. These distances are measured in millimeters. That is 1,000 millimeters, so that is 1 meter from there to there. That is 2 meters, 3 meters, 4 meters and 5 meters and so on. So 5,000 millimeters, 4,000, 3,000, 2,000, 1,000. Now your material starts at the bottom here, and what happens is, how much do they fill this tube with water before the water comes through the material and starts to drip through? So a hydrostatic head of 2000 means that you require 2 meters of water in a column standing on top of that cloth before it will penetrate. And 3,000, 4,000 and 5,000 and so on. It is purely the weight of water causing pressure on this material before it bursts through. That is the hydrostatic head, explained in its most basic format. To be fair, that's quite a visual way of understanding the hydrostatic head with the column of water. It's very easy for you to get that picture in your mind and understand what's going on. However, I will explain, it is actually tested today in a different way. They use pressure from below and they clamp a piece of material onto a press and they push water from underneath under different pressures, and the results are the same. It's just instead of the weight of the water, they're using compression to simulate the weight of the water. So it's done in a much more confined space, it's done in a much more efficient way, but the results are exactly the same. And they're still read the same, so 1,000 is still a meter, 2,000, etc, etc. That is how they test it now. Well, let's move on. Let's talk about different materials, and we might as well start with tents. Now this is where it can get a little bit confusing. For a material to be classed as waterproof, it must achieve a minimum of 1,500 millimeters. So a hydrostatic head of 1.5 will achieve a waterproof material. So then you come across your first tent that is 2,000 hydrostatic head, and you think to yourself, is that enough? Is that going to do? And then you compare it with other tents in the shop and they're like 5,000, 6,000, 7,000, and you think, well, that's going to keep me drier. That's not. It's going to leak. It's going to leak. What you have to remember is that 1.5 means it's waterproof. It's waterproof. Anything above that is still waterproof, and it just gets more waterproof the higher the number. So don't think, for starters, if you've got a tent which is only 2000 hydrostatic head, then you might as well just put it in the bin because it's not waterproof. Yes, it is. It's incredibly waterproof. And there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. The only thing you've got to do is maintain that material and perhaps treat it once a year. And that way, you're guaranteed that you'll stay dry. Let's have a look at some tents, some materials now, and let's compare them, shall we? Especially the inside, stitching, and other things that make a good tent a good tent. Here we go, here's the look at our first tent. This is the Eurohike Backpacker 2 Deluxe. I bought this one from Millets, I think it was £50. As we zoom in, you'll see various bits of information from left to right. Once we've focused in, there will be the fire rated, the hydrostatic head, and usually what material the poles are made out of. Well, we're not looking at those today, we're looking at the hydrostatic head, and as you can clearly see, this has a hydrostatic head, HH, of 2000. The ground sheet that comes with this tent is more like a polythene. It's a woven polythene, little tiny squares, and it's made by weaving these tiny squares and then sealing it all up. So this is not in any shape, form or fashion breathable, but it is, however, waterproof to an extent. It doesn't give you the hydrostatic head of this ground sheet because basically it's not very good, but it will suffice. It is waterproof as long as you don't start kneeling on it or stick thorns through it, etc, 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 and I will explain a little bit more about that shortly. But before I do that, it is Father's Day, so I'll have a glass of wine. To all you new fathers, to all you old fathers, and to all you old gits, happy Father's Day. This is where things can get quite interesting when it comes to tents. This being a very budget tent, it has what we call taped seams. We've already established that the hydrostatic head is 2000, therefore it is just slightly above the minimum requirement of 1.5. It's 2000, but it's still waterproof. It means it's waterproof, so it should be absolutely fine, and it is. And it has taped seams because it's a budget tent. It's not ever going to compete with the high-end market tents, and it's not going to happen. So the way they overcome, the way they seal these tents is by using taped seams. And what do I mean by a taped seam? Well, have a look, look. You look here, you see the joint where the material is joined together. Well, on the inside, you will be able to see a reflective strip that goes down between the joints, and that's a taped seam, right? That's the difference. I see we can perhaps just shimmer it in the lights and you may be able to see that. I'm hoping that this will pick up on camera, but that's what's known as a taped seam. So most budget tents will come with a taped seam. Let's look at the other side now with a much more expensive tent. Now this is one of our high-end tents, or this is one of my high-end tents, and the material itself is so thin. It's double siliconized, in other words it's got waterproof membrane on both sides of the tent. The webbing and the way this material is made, that when it's sewn together or when it's stitched, it will reseal itself, so the stitching does not require taped seams. So if you look inside, that's inside the tent, very difficult to see the difference. You'll see there's no tape at all, just the stitching. Outside, just the stitching. And that's because of the quality of the material we're using. It's much more lightweight and it's much better than that. Now then, so we now established that there is two different types of material. Your budget low-end hydrostatic head of 2000 requires taped seams because of the manufacturing process. It's going to be made by budget, and it's going to be made quickly, and it's going to be made in a chop shop somewhere, and they're going to churn them out very cheaply. Because they are cheap, some people will say that you may need to seam seal tents yourself. What is seam sealing? You can buy tubes of seam sealer, and basically it's for going over the external stitching that you've seen where the tent was joined, and you paint this on to form another external tape, so to speak, so you're waterproofing the stitching on the way down. Now the best way to mix it is to actually thin it out, so you can use chemicals to thin it down so it's like much more easier to paint on, as opposed to trying to move this glue up and down the tent, which will make a mess. You use thinners, you thin it out a little bit, mix it in a pot, and you paint it on like a paint, and it will just go on much easier. Would I seam seal this tent with a cheap budget tent? It's got tape seams currently at the moment. No, I probably wouldn't. What I would do is get some Feb Seal every summer and put the tent up in the garden and paint everything with Feb Seal. That has never ever let me down on any of the tents I've bought, even that one. I've only used it, well, I've only used it once when I took it for my daughter, and she used it just a few weeks ago. And it rained and it rained and it rained, and not one single drop of water got in that tent. That's a hydrostatic head of 2000 and not one drop of water through it, and it rained constantly for at least 12 hours. So in my mind, there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever, and just wants treating every year. When you come to high-end tents, or start to go up a little bit, when I was looking for a particular tent, especially the teepee style tent, there was a particular tent that I was looking at. It turned out to be a little bit too small for me. In the length when I lied down inside, it was just a little bit too small, but everybody recommended you seam sealed the tent before using it. I'm not going to buy a tent that I have to do work on it before I use it. To me, you're buying the wrong tent. If you buy something which leaks, why are you buying it? That's all I can say. If you've used a tent for some years and it starts to leak in those areas, then seam seal away. I don't have a problem with that, because you're maintaining your tent and you're carrying out repairs to it. That's what I would expect to do, but not from a brand new tent. Absolutely no. There was a comment made on my high-end tent that I needed to seam seal the top of the tent, and when somebody else asked the manufacturers about that process, they said, what are you doing that for? You do not need to seam seal this tent, and if it leaks due to a manufacturing error, send it back and we'll replace it free of charge. Well, that's the difference. Despite all that, I've been talking about this tent, about how wonderful it is, how high-end it is, how waterproof it is, yada yada yada, really rating it. But what's its hydrostatic head? That's only 3000 millimeters. Only 3 meters of water on top of that material before it will punch through. Do you need any more than that? Not where I'm going with it. And that makes a difference. 2000, 3000. They're not the highest rated waterproof tents going by far. In fact, I've got some that are 5000, but I love that tent better. It's a brilliant tent. But where am I going to go with it? Well, I'm going to go in the mountains, but not mountains. The furthest highest I'm going to be in that tent ever is going to be Scafell Pike, which is the highest point in the UK. But I'm never going to go any higher than that. I'm never going to be in the deepest, darkest winter on top of Scafell Pike in that tent. It won't take it. It's not designed for that. It's classed as a 3-season tent only, not 4. I will use it all year round. I will use it in 4 seasons, but I am not going to put it under too much duress, because it's not built for that. But some things you need to look out for to help you stay dry when you're looking for your tent. And let's have a look at that now. Let's have a look at what differences can be made to keep you dry just by sheer manufacturing alone. Well, let's start by looking at this toggle. This toggle is stitched in to the side of the tent, and it's where one of the poles comes through and that clips onto the external pole. So that's absolutely fine. Alright, got no issues with that. But let's have a look now on the reverse side. Straight away, in the exact same position, we have a tab which our inner tent is attached to. Now, This material will absorb water, and if it's not treated, that water will seep through your tent onto the inside, onto this tab, down here, and then onto your inner fly. So it's very important for you to check that and make sure every year that gets a good coating to keep it waterproof, to prevent that from happening. Now let's look at our other tent. Let's see how they combated that issue of water coming through and draining through. Well, in principle then, here is our external support for this tent. This is a guide rope and it pulls through this tent. Now on the inside, it's a shame you can't see what I can see. In fact, I might be able to show you that. Right, I've turned the light off on this one because I want to show you something, and I need to use my head torch to do it. So just bear with me. Now look, can you see through the tent? The internal tab is higher. Can you see that? The internal tab is higher. Why would you do that? Well, this being up top, as the water comes down, it reaches that tab and should it seep through and get on the inside of the tent. It's below the inner tab which holds up your inner. So no matter how much it rains and how much it comes through, it will only track on the inside of the fly down to the edge of the tent. It won't come in. And that's why just a simple design change will make this a far more waterproof tent. Should it come through, which is highly unlikely, then it won't affect the inner fly. It won't use it, and it's called capillary action that will draw moisture up the material and down onto your inner fly. We've looked at budget tent versus expensive tent. We've looked at the hydrostatic head rating. We've looked at some design features which separate the two, and we've also looked at the ground sheet for the budget version. Now let's have a look at the ground sheet for the expensive version, and that does have a hydrostatic rating. So this then is our Nigel Wickiup 3 footprint. It is specifically designed for the Nigel Wickiup 3. I can't really use it on any other tent, it doesn't fit. It's a 10,000 hydrostatic head. Right? That's 10 meters of water to push through this. And it needs to be on a ground sheet, and I'll explain why. The pressure that you can apply on the ground when putting your hand down, elbow or knee onto your ground sheet is equivalent to lots and lots of pressure on the ground sheet from the water above. So it mimics it. So if you're on a boggy ground and you're kneeling in your little fly sheet, the chances are something like that budget one, you're going to get water to start to seep through because you're putting it under too much pressure. With your knee pushing into the ground or your elbow, there is a good chance that water will come up through the ground via your ground sheet. So the quicker you can get your inflated bed up or roll mat up or whatever and take that weight off that ground sheet and spread the load, the better for you. So most of the tents that you can buy now always come with an additional footprint. Now some good Vango tents really only have hydrostatic heads up to a maximum of 5,000, which potentially means that if you do kneel on it, you could actually have water coming up through. Double that with a footprint, and now you've got two layers of 5,000, 10,000. 10,000 will bring it up to this. Now you've got yourself a waterproof ground sheet. Now the water's not going to get in. You'd seriously have to put some pressure on that to enable water to come through. However, even on my system, I'll have the footprint at 10,000, my inner flies and all the other ones at 10,000 as well. So I could really be on some wet ground and nothing's going to come through because I will have a combined hydrostatic head of 20,000, which isn't bad. But again, I would be very quick to put up my ground sheet. That is why we use footprints. Footprints are always rated hydrostatic head as well. and it enables you to fully understand. So anything less than 5,000, you're really going to struggle a little bit on wet ground. You will need to find an additional footprint to make sure that you are waterproof. Come winter, don't go below 10,000. You're gonna need a minimum of 10,000 to be in a tent in the winter where it's more likely to be wet, miserable and horrible outside, and you're gonna need that extra hydrostatic ability to fight it off and keep it back. Remember, a good, well treated fly on the top of you, always maintained, looked after, isn't gonna let you down at all. But your ground sheet takes a lot of knocks, a lot of sticks. Keep your eye on it, patch it, repair it as you need to, but it won't let you down if, again, you look after it. So that's very important. Winter, minimum 10,000. Bust, end of story. Let's move on to clothing. This is my Gore-Tex jacket. It's a very old Gore-Tex jacket. It must be very old because it's only extra large, and I can literally just fit in it. But if you look at this jacket, you can study it all day, you can go online and you can check it out, and you will not find a hydrostatic head rating. And that is because Gore-Tex does not follow the hydrostatic head rating when it comes to its clothing. It works on a different system of testing. It works on a factory based test of rain penetration. So it basically, they put the jacket on a dummy, a mannequin or whatever, and then they throw rain at it, all types of weather at it, to see its weak points, where it seeps through, and then they deal with those problems. And again, Gore-Tex use taped seams on most of their equipment. So eventually, as an old jacket starts to break down, the seams separate and your jacket begins to leak. A little bit like mine does now. Mine's a very old Gore-Tex jacket. I was sad to see the back of it, really. It's been with me on many hills and many adventures. And us men, we do get attached to our clothes a little bit, don't we? I've got underpants older than me kids. No, I really have. Anyway, so I don't really want to get rid of it. I'm going to keep hold of it as long as I can. But what does carry the hydrostatic head marking? Well, most of your brand names out there do. Yeah, I don't need to go through all those names. You know who they are. There are a few surprises out there. Yeah, some of the things that you might find out about when you start researching about waterproof ability of jackets can be quite surprising. And one of the things I want you to remember right back at the start when I said 1.5 is the minimum hydrostatic head to enable you to class something as being waterproof, 2 being the lowest sort of temps that you get. Now, there are particular manufacturers who manufacture their clothing to the absolute minimum standard of 1.5. And you have to be careful about who you buy your waterproof clothing off. Now, bear in mind, it has to be waterproof, classed as waterproof if it reaches 1.5. So we're not saying it isn't claiming to be what it is. What I'm saying is at the absolute minimum it can be. And a lot of mountain warehouse clothing start at 1.5. Some of their top jackets are only rated at 1.5. So you need to remember that when you start looking at buying a high-end jacket, or you're trying to buy a jacket on a budget and you want the best bang for your buck. Now, some of the high-end retailers, North Face, etc., will use a minimum of 10,000 hydrostatic head for their clothing. But other manufacturers also use the same material, but to enable them to get around licensing laws and bills and being charged for particular branded materials, they don't brand it, they don't name it. So therefore you can get really good hydrostatic head equipment up to 20,000 hydrostatic head but it might not say it, but it is the same material. And I've actually written them down on a piece of paper because I can't remember, but I do know one of the shocks for me was Berghaus do that. So some of the Berghaus equipment that you buy is absolutely some of the top of the range material used for waterproofing. I didn't know that. I've always thought Berghaus was good quality gear anyhow, and perhaps a little pricey at times, but now you know why. The material is some of the best you can get. Other surprises, other little snurgles that you might not know used good material but don't claim to use that material, and I am looking at a list because I can't remember, is OMM, Radrite and Marmot. They start at 15,000 hydrostatic head. That's an awful lot, isn't it? So that's OMM, Berghaus, Radrite and Marmot. There you go. Now I actually found that out. I did a little bit of research and found that out myself, but I thought that was quite amazing to think that, you know, these guys are selling you top quality material, but they're not telling you that. So you might pick this garment up and think, oh, it's not hydrostatic head rated, or of some reason, but it actually is, and it's best you can get. So now you can go all the way up to 30,000 hydrostatic head. And if you are attempting to go to Antarctic or the North Pole, and that's the sort of gear you need to be using. If you are buying a decent jacket for the Lake District or anywhere like that, anything above 10,000 hydrostatic head is going to be more than adequate. So, in conclusion to when it comes to garments, Gore-Tex isn't rated because it tests it differently, but it's a tried and tested method. The other materials, the more modern materials that have come in behind it, use the hydrostatic head as an example, as a selling machine, but you are getting exactly what you pay for. If you're smart enough and you know the know, you can buy lesser priced materials but get the same actual material itself. So you can buy a different jacket but the same material from a less known brand. And every one of those items, those garments, will require maintenance every year. If you spend £500 on a decent jacket that's going to take you up and down fell, dale, hill, mound, Scottish moorland, lochs, cairns, whatever, you're going to spend £500 on a jacket. You want to make sure 3 seasons up the road you're still using it, unless of course you're a tackle tart and you'll be buying another one for £500 the following year. And if you're my size, which is extra large, and you want to get rid of your jacket because it's the wrong colour and it's last year's, give me a bell, will you? I'll probably buy it off you because I can't afford that for a jacket. So I'm pretty much done now with this video. I've tried to explain in a very simple term the meaning of hydrostatic head, how it benefits you. Do you as an individual need a 10,000 hydrostatic head tent? Do you need to spend £1,500 on a tent if you're going to be summer camping anywhere? No, you don't. No, 2,000 hydrostatic head is more than adequate for you and keep you dry. Do you need to spend a lot of money on a jacket which is 30,000 hydrostatic head if you're not going to the North Pole? Probably not. No, you don't. And you know, they're extortion money as well. Modern materials cost an awful lot of money. In conclusion then, we don't need to go out there and buy top of the range equipment if we're not travelling to the North Pole, do we? A decent 5,000 hydrostatic head tent will do you absolutely fine any time of year in this country. I've only got a 3,000 hydrostatic head for my best tent, and that is perfectly fine. It's performed amicably for me in the past, and I have definitely experienced lots of wind and lots of rain with it, and I don't have a problem with it at all. If you have a 2,000 hydrostatic head tent, don't worry about it. Treat the bugger next year and you'll be fine. But get yourself a decent ground sheet to go underneath to protect you from the elements from seeping up underneath. That's all you need to do, and a piece of plastic will do that perfectly fine. It just means you've got to carry it. That's all. That's all it means. So I hope you found that useful. I certainly found it useful when I found out about the materials from manufacturers not claiming to be hydrostatic head rated purely to save money on the manufacturing licensing. So that was quite interesting to find that out, especially from Berghaus. Berghaus have always been renowned quality. I did find that quite surprising. But again, you may be able to pick up a bargain, something which is far better than you anticipated, just by knowing those brands that I mentioned earlier. I hope you found that useful. If you did, leave a comment. If you like the contents altogether, why don't you subscribe to the channel, and who knows what I get up to. Yeah, I do a lot of carp fishing. I do a lot of everything actually. So please feel free to join me on any of them. You're always welcome to come along. And if you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If you have a comment, comment. If it's good, great. And if you have a question, ask it. I'll always answer it, and I'll always be as honest as I can. Thanks very much. See you later. Bye-bye.